Welcome to number 788 podcast with me, your host, Des Latham. This is episode 4 of a 6-part series. 788 is the force number used by Max Lauker, former Swedish Arctic Ranger special operations soldier and intelligence professional. Max has written a memoir called Number 788, My Experiences in Swedish Special Operations, Preparing for NATO and the War on Terror. In previous episodes, we heard about Max's training in Special Force Ops in Sweden and beyond, his deployment, and his baptism of fire in Colombia, and so on. Hi, Max. Thank you for the wonderful opportunity to talk with you once again. A real honor.
Hi, Des. I'm happy to be back, and the honor is mine to be able to tap into your experience and have these very, very good chats that we have every other week.
I get nervous when you use the word tap into my experience, as long as it's not a double tap. So let's get to business. We've covered your experience chronologically. In episode 3, we left off just before your Balkan deployment, a really significant moment in your life and world history, I think, from what you described. But first, I want you to talk a little bit about the run-up to that deployment, the last days in Colombia, and any other important bits of information as we lead into this really crucial part of your life story.
Well, I would say that it's mostly on the mental and personal level at that point, because we have been in Colombia for 3.5 months, and we are. This is our first deployment that is half official. Nobody has been overseas before in this capacity. We're living the best life. We're having a real cowboy lifestyle with the Americans and the Germans in the jungles of Colombia, and it's pretty relaxed. You have your barbecues, your beers, and it's like you're living in a fantasy kind of make-believe world of your own. And what happens then is that we get the call, and immediately it feels like you're going to miss this, because you understand that this is a once-off. Even if you're 18, 19, 20, 25 years old, you understand that this is too good. This is not how it works in the real world. And of course, it has happened to me again, but not on this level, because the more experience you have, the more time goes, the more regulated things become. And this was like a small gap, a rift in the dimensional spectrum. So we had the opportunity to live like cowboys for a while. And I think it hits us when we get the call from Colombia, and our squad leader, he assembles us. He's actually he was a captain, so he was quite high up to be squad leader. But that was how we did it then. And he said that we got the call, and now we're going to go back home. So it was quite sad. It was a bit of a sad moment, because this is never going to happen again. This is a once-off. But of course, everybody was excited, because we were hoping that we were going to get Afghanistan or Iraq, of course. So we were in quite good spirits when we left. Still,
you mentioned when we spoke last that of all your deployments, the period in the Balkans felt like the most important. But you also said, explain to me what happened when you got those lists. Apparently it was a presentation of some sort of slide when you got home and you found out where you're going to be redeployed. And you describe it as going to Kosovo as the home of the Swedish feel-good coffee and cake type of military man deployment. Why were we being punished, you said? Talk a little bit about that moment and what happened next.
Yeah, so we're sitting there, we're getting the presentation, and we have one small part of this unit is going to Afghanistan with a former French Foreign Legionnaire captain, which is he is a legend in himself. So that was a good start. And then the rest were going to Kosovo, and it felt there and then it felt like, yeah, it's over now. My career is over. There's no use being in the army anymore, because Kosovo had been running since 14 deployments for several years, and at some point in most missions, for example, Afghanistan has never been a coffee and cake kind of mission, because it's always been highly dangerous. But in Kosovo, fairly stable peace was established quickly, so it was safe. It's been a safe environment, more or less. It was a bit rough in the early years in Bosnia and Kosovo, but then it has been more or less safe. And I'm going to say this in a very general aspect, because I know we have had riots, we have had some clashes, but overall it's been good. It's mostly traffic accidents and somebody that has a heart attack, so the danger is limited. And it's also a place, because in Sweden we have always had a tradition to support United Nations missions and some NATO missions, And the system works that since we never had any contract soldiers back then, you just took people that if you did military service, you had good reviews from that or good grades or whatever they call them, you could apply to go overseas for 6 months to Kosovo or Bosnia or something like that. And if you were accepted, you had a bit of, refresher training for a few months, and then off you went. It was a good way to get away from your family, from your job for a bit, have a bit of an adventure. And of course, the same applied for Afghanistan. I think the system in itself, and it's nothing wrong with it, because people want to do good, and they do good as, they play the hand that they're dealt. So there's nothing else they could have done. But it was a very, very calm mission at that point in 2006. So I was extremely disappointed because I couldn't see anything else than Afghanistan at that point. When you're 23 years old, 24 years old, and you're a freshly trained operator, interestingly enough, the only thing you want to do is fight. You want to go to war because you need to prove yourself. And it's quite sad, actually, but it's not uncommon. And that was my instinct at that moment. So I was horrified initially.
Yeah, and then, looking at how it was set up, you're going to be part of the I-star element, firstly. Secondly, specialist capability. You should have probably at that stage got the inkling that was not just going to be a redeployment to the Coffee Brigade. And you're rotating as part of the Swedish KS-14B, I think it was, not as an established part of the conventional force, but incognito. Didn't you get a hunch that you were going to be up to something quite interesting at about that point?
Professionally, yes. You know that it's even after that meeting, when you understand that you're going to be attached to an I-star, it was also the SRR, the British SRR. They were building or trying to build up the regiment in 2006. So of course, yeah, it's going to be good. But I think the disappointment lingered with me at least until we came down, because it's, even if you have all the flags there, you have all the green flags that says, yeah, this is going to be a pretty tight mission. It's going to be pretty secret, and it's all the players are there. But I can only say it was youth, because you want the action. And it's also something at that point, you're not experienced enough when you work with intelligence gathering and all of that, and surveillance, that is a different kind of action. You know that if you think about it logically, but you don't know that, you don't have the experience to back it up. So you kind of don't know what to expect, because it's going to be a lot of waiting. It's going to be a lot of boring. And yes, you understand that, but also you want Afghanistan on that hand. You want to kick in doors. You want to, to ride in the desert dust. But so, yeah, I should have. And I did eventually. I mean, it was like my captain said, Captain B, he said to me, this is going to be one of your most premium missions ever, maybe. He said that on that day when we came out of that room. And he was right. It is still, I would say it's top 2 missions ever, because you got the full spectrum. You never get the full spectrum anymore. Never had it after that.
Yeah, I think looking at what happened, you arrived with false name tags. At the moment, you're using an alias in the same way. So, whereas most of the other soldiers around you were using their names, obviously. And then, of course, the kind of weapons they started handing out. When you started supplying yourselves to go into looking for, I think it's Dusan. You were handed the Barretts and the PSG 90s. The recoillesses, a whole bunch of things you handed out there, and you must have had a sneaky suspicion from then on that the heat was coming. So explain to me what happened as you hunted down Dusan. If I get his name incorrect, please correct me.
No, I'm not even going to be, because all of us is going to get comments on that. So I'm going to leave that with you, and I'm going to save myself this time with the pronunciation. But yes, so first I can ask comment on the weaponry, that when you have a unit that is this young and that is still that unregulated, it kind of gets like this, because you get force-fed with everything. You get everything that you point at, weapons-wise, equipment-wise, vehicle-wise, everything, almost. And the budget is very big. So they just, if you're a quartermaster at a unit like that, you're not going to hold back. You just take everything and then see, let it sort itself out with time if you don't need it. And of course, with experience, you start to build an understanding of what you need and what you don't. But in the beginning, it's mostly like being force-fed. And when it comes to that raid, it was we did it with Italian special forces. We were brought in as muscle. It was one of our first direct actions that we did. We actually played a small part. Part of us had an RF function from with the Germans, Airborne Reaction Force, and then the rest of us were supporting on the ground. And what we had, so our physical mission was quite easy. It was a small raid on a compound in a very hostile village at night, and we were coming in quite hot. But we had a secondary mission that was more important, because at that point in time, the French were not in good standing. And it happens all of the time in the intelligence circles, because they go in and out of good standing with each other. But at that point, they were not in good standing for some reason. So, and we had debt to pay to the French, because we've been training with them. They have been giving us some premium missions. So we were contacted by them before the mission, and we had to basically retrieve information that from about the high value targets, about the seizures, about anything interesting there. We had to provide them with that without getting caught by the Italians or the Americans who were organizing the operations. So that was a first for me, and I think that was the most interesting part of that, because when you have to hide from, when you have to deceive your own allied forces, it felt like it was a high stakes kind of game. And the raid, I mean, I'm always going to remember it. It was not my first combat experience, or I actually didn't do any combat there, but it was a quite sad story. It was a lot of children involved, and it was adults, children, when you just grab everything and they just disappear forever kind of thing. Of course, they were sorted out by the authorities, but it left some memories for sure.
I mean, one of the things that interested me is there were 4 of you in your Bergens, and you had to cram into a kind of rundown building, middle of the night. I think you called it Goose Egg 2's the one kind of initial target. And then suddenly people start firing at you. What happened there?
That was, I think this was our first real OP that we did on the ground in the Balkans. It was actually a really good one. I also still remember that, because it was a school book kind of OP that we built. Forest OP, long infill, really nice, and green. Everything green, nothing in civilian clothing. We were dropped by a civilian car though. So we had a green drop, or a civilian drop. But then we did this amazing OP. I actually didn't know how it came to happen eventually, because it was one of those great thorn bushes, and they're very thick and they're very dense, so it's hard to get into to start with. So we had to crawl in underneath it, and we pushed the thorn up inside to create a little square. But once there, we were there for 14 days. And we were watching this compound and trying to keep track of them and build some files and establish the routines and all of that. And one night, it's pretty calm. It's a quite silent night. And I remember it because I had a little breeze. I was sitting on guard duty, and I had a bit of breeze in my face, and I was happy about that. And then we were fired upon just a few, 30, 40 centimeters above me, because I'm, of course, sitting a bit above the OP since they're lying down. So I just pushed down to the ground, and then I had to decide in a few seconds, are they shooting at us, or are they shooting in our general direction? Which is a very important distinction, because in countries like this, and also in Afghanistan and Iraq for that matter, it can happen that quite easily that you can be shot at without actually being in a contact. You're just being, in the way. And when you have an OP, the reaction has to be a bit different. This was a long-standing OP. It has been run for years by the Brits before us. And you have to make the choice. Are we going to break this OP now and extract? Then we're going to burn this OP as well. So, but we kept our cool and decided this is not a contact, because we could see them down at the house. They were standing there having some kind of shooting practice. And in the morning, we could see that they had been shooting at an old tractor that was in our direction. But it's intense. And also, it's not as intense as combat, of course, but it gives you, it's most of the decisions that you quickly, you're 24 years old and you have to understand, you train to shoot back and you have to keep calm because you want to try to save the OP. What are you going to do? Are we in contact, or are they just having fun? Because it's common also in most of these countries that they do something that we call recon by fire. They just shoot in different directions or in forested areas and stuff like that to trying to flush out people that might be hiding like us.
But when you eventually came to be involved in the raid, you say it took 10 minutes. In that raid with the kids involved, and the woman, I think it's the wife of Dusan, I think was involved there. Was that op where after all these days patiently waiting, the actual raid itself was 10 minutes? Was that correct?
Yes. So basically, we break this OP, and the raid is a result. It was for a cousin and a brother. So it was not for them eventually for the main high value targets here, but. Anyways, yeah, it took 10 minutes. We busted into the village, and we knew we had to work quickly because the village, they would actually fight back because it's a quite small force. It doesn't matter if how specialized you are. Even we were 4, and then we had maybe 10 guys from the Italian special forces, and of course we had a QRF in the air, but that's not a lot in the village where they live, almost 1,000 people. And they all want to flush you out if they can. So they have to believe that it's a big thing happening now, because of course they're not going to stand up to NATO forces or KFOR. But we also have to worry about that because somebody is going to report this contact. The main official KFOR QRF is going to be pulled, and we want to be out of there because this is an unsanctioned raid from all, and it's going to be a lot of uncomfortable questions. So you have to be quite quick. And we were. I mean, it's quick. They were really quick. It took maybe 1 minute to clear the house for them, two floors. They used flashbangs. They were very, very aggressive. They were shooting to kill because they didn't have, I don't know. I don't know if they had other intel, but they were very aggressive. There were signs, of course, there were 2 armed people inside that were trying to resist, but didn't help for them. So yeah, it was a quick one, and then we left to never have anything to do with this again, unfortunately, because that's a sad part. You never see the end of the story when when you're just a part of the puzzle usually, which is a bit unsatisfying at times, but that's a part of the job, I guess.
Yeah, it sounds like being a medic. So chapter 15 of your book, you describe about finding the jackal. And you mentioned the Germans, working with the Germans. You were assisting the Swedish, I think, SCOTTs or Scott unit with some mobile surveillance in central or downtown Pristina. What happened there?
So we assisted in an informal capacity because, of course, a lot of countries have a lot of different elements on the ground and the different sensors. And one of the sensors we had there, it's a disbanded unit today, but they were called the Scott team, and they were part of the Swedish civilian intelligence and secret police at the time. And they had been there for quite some while, both for mentoring purposes and to look at places. War zones are always great for a lot of criminals and other shady people assemble there sometimes. So it's a good place to keep your eyes open. And so we are doing we're actually not doing work for them. We did some work for them in central Pristina. Of course, because we had meetings with we had a handler and we had a source up in the north that we were also keeping tabs on. But this operation was mostly about finding what we later. We didn't know that at the point. We just had 2 high-value targets, and it was one of them was called Cossack, and the other one was called Benchwarmer. And this was again an American operation, and we are doing mobile surveillance to find one or more of 4 unknown vehicles that we were looking for. And it's almost an impossible feat because it's a busy city. Traffic is moving. So we had some air resources, we had air scan, and we had 4 vehicles. So we were just doing this for weeks until we eventually got them both of the high-value targets and their car on the same picture. And I took it with the help of my colleagues, of course. But it was a pretty epic moment in my career, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, the thing you mentioned, the gangs, you were talking about, they were kept adjusting their modus operandi, and you thought, okay, they're getting inside information. Who do you think was feeding them that inside information?
Police, government. I mean, first you have on the local level, in a country that's on the mend from war. Of course, it's still always going to be a fair amount of corruption within the police and the government. But from our side, our police is also leaking extensively. It still is, and government, because I mean, underpaid civil servants and the police officers, and you can actually see this is even worse today. I think we are at the worst level ever, because the gangs are smart. Even 20 years ago, they understood that we're going to now recruit young people and families that are going to, they're going to go into the police, they're going to go into politics. So it's a smart move from them. So it's actually getting worse, but it was definitely coming from our direction. And they have a lot of buying power, organized crime. And a lot of, they don't have any problems finding people that have problems that they can exploit for their purposes. So it was leaking quite heavily from our side, or not from our unit, but from home, from Sweden, unfortunately. But so you also need to keep tabs on that, who you inform and who you pass your intelligence onto. Even if you're working for them, it might not always be the wisest move to pass it straight back onto them if you understand that they're also passing it forward.
Yeah, tricky. And then you worked closer to the Kosovo border, carrying your camera and your weapons. And then you stumbled across two gainfuls, two SAM-6s, two batteries. And you say they were located under some carelessly placed nets. That must be quite a shock.
Yeah, it was. I mean, we were doing cross-border operations. I'm not going to say that it's a surprising move for when you're in the special forces or doing any kind of special operations. Of course, you're going to cross borders, and of course, it's not going to align with international conventions. So that is not the problem. I was a bit surprised because it was a very sensitive conflict, and the Serbs weren't pushing that kind of hard. I mean, they didn't say, yeah, we have nuclear weapons or anything. They were quite quiet at the time. But as we were pushing in there, we had some indications that they had some troop movements because they had this border exclusion zone agreement on both sides, where you have to, both Kosovo and Serbia had to refrain from placing heavy equipment and heavy troops in this area. So, of course, I mean, it's not illegal for them to have maybe a border station. They have border patrols. They also have stuff like that. So that's fine. So, but we knew something was happening, and we thought they had a special forces fob, because before we even crossed the border, we found a Serbian patrol that came across the border and transmitted to a source within Kosovo. To a village that was in line of sight with that place, and that was the first one, which they later caught as a result of this operation. And then we pushed in further and further. We looked at 3 sites, and then eventually we find this FOB, which we think is a Special Forces FOB, but it was not. It was a SAM site. So that was so surprising. I never thought, because when you train, basic training, you look at all of these pictures of Soviet equipment, and I mean, that was our main adversary, or has become again today, but it was back then as well. And I thought when I did that, you're never going to see any of this shit in real life. Nobody uses this. And those who do, we are basically friends with, or most of them. But yeah, there we are. And I was so surprised because I only had my small pocket camera and my night vision. So we didn't have any pro kit because it was very, very hairy area to move around, and we had to move very light. So I took 2 pictures of the radar unit and the SAM battery through my night vision. Yes, so we could prove that it was there before we pulled out. But yeah, it was. I mean, it's not amazing to see military hardware near a border, but I never thought I would. I was just so surprised that they would have 2 SA-6 gainfuls. I never thought I would see them in the wild.
Yeah, exactly. And also, they were breaking the code, as you suggest. I mean, it was close enough to the border to be in this exclusion zone, or do you think they were within their rights to park these two there? Because if they were carelessly throwing nets over them, they obviously thought no one would spot them.
Yeah, I think at that time, I mean, this was so long after the war. So I think like we were monitoring them quite sloppy. They became kind of sloppy as well. Because this looked, I mean, it looks like, soldiers out on exercise, but I think definitely they were not in the right to be there, obviously. I mean, according to the agreement, they were on the wrong side of that agreement. But I do understand why they put it there, because, I mean, it was an excellent spot to have a surface-to-air missile battery. I mean, so why not? I would also put it there, probably myself. So, yeah. But they should have been a bit more careful.
And then as we finish off, I mean, ending off the Kosovo experience and the Balkan experience, there were obviously quite a few other incidents. Anything else that comes to mind that you think formed a lot of your memories and tightened up your thoughts about being deployed into that area and you remember to this day?
We can just do the circle. I did all of my first live operations, live OPs, basically, live surveillance, live Foxtrot. Of course, we did a bit before, but in a larger scale. We were working against the biggest war criminals back then that were still at large. We had we worked against people who had ties, deep ties to the 9/11 attacks. And we worked against nation, Serbia, which so the spectrum here is a spectrum I never seen before, because it's not, I mean, it was a bit of everything. It was like a candy shop. You have a bit of chocolate, have a bit of everything. So I would say that formed me, and we also got to run our own sources down there. That it was our first one, and of course we were, as a unit, technically yes, we were ready for this. But also we were way too not inexperienced, but it was a pretty rough thing to start with. But we did it very well, and to be 24 years old and have a part of starting running sources, it's unusual. So then you understand that, yeah, we can do this, I can do this, and I can definitely be a part of this world going forward.
Coming of age. So when we'll finish off now, and when we come back, Episode 5, where are we heading off next?
I think we can wrap this up into talk a bit about what happened after this, how this unit developed. And I think after that, we're going to talk a bit about, I hope we can get Tony in and we can talk a bit about writing this book and making it.
Yes, I'm looking forward to chatting to Tony again. And you joined us for the first podcast, first episode. And we've had a chance to spend some time together, but I'm looking forward to chatting to Tony again. He's a great author, and his knowledge about military history and military, being a former special force soldier himself, it's going to be really important to spend some time with him at the end. But for this episode 4 of number 788 podcast with Max Lauker, former Swedish Arctic Ranger and special ops soldier and intelligence professional. It's been really interesting, and I look forward to chatting to you again for episode 5 and taking the next steps in your remarkable life.
Thank you, Des, and I'm looking forward to it as well. See you next time.